Welcome to Heavy Metal's Most Shocking Crimes. I hope all you guys and gals will enjoy this. We got a lot of crazy metal crimes to unpack from the heavy metal community, from the heavy metal world. Some of these bands, some of these musicians you probably may or may not heard of. So I hope to offer some new stories, some new cases that maybe you're not familiar with, and hopefully get you into some new heavy metal bands or some new heavy metal conspiracies. So up first, we have the infamous Varg Vikernes from Burzum. Obviously, Burzum doesn't need too much of an introduction. Neither does our good friend Varg Vikernes, but we are going to discuss the charges of arson, the convictions of arson, as well as murder. So basically, Varg Vikernes' crimes start roughly around 1992 after the whole scene in Norway, the black metal scene, was kind of taking off around that time. And, like we said, his crimes began in the early 90s with the infamous arsons of historic churches in Norway. The first of those being the Fontov Stav Church that you guys are probably familiar with. It's been featured on black metal album covers, heavy metal DVDs, all that good stuff. So there was a lot of arsons going on, and we talked a little bit about in the Dark Throne video and also the Immortal video, sort of the inspiration behind these, I guess you could say the inspiration behind these criminal acts against Christianity. I'm not going to cover all of that philosophy in this video, but so obviously Varg Vikernes was suspected and eventually charged with arsons, which was pretty bad, but the arsons were eventually kind of overshadowed by the murder of Mayhem's Oystein Arthseth, known as Euronymous, committed by obviously Varg Vikernes. Now, obviously, there's speculation that this was self-defense. I'm going to kind of give you guys a rundown of what took place. So just real quick, I do just kind of want to recap the arsons before we get to sort of the more serious charges of Varg Vikernes. So Burzum's Varg Vikernes, as well as Mayhem's Oystein Arthseth, it's going to be a tongue twister trying to keep all these Norwegian names straight. They basically were titillating the Norwegian press in articles published in the Bergen Tidende, where under anonymous stage names, the bands, the individuals, the musicians from these particular bands basically confessed to a string of arsons that took place around local churches, but they also sort of slipped in there somewhere a murder that took place in the town of Lillehammer, and we'll actually get to that further in in this video. And actually, that particular murder, to my knowledge, was not committed by either Oystein Arthseth or Burzum. It was actually committed by another musician from another band that we'll get into. So basically, from Varg Vikernes' confessions, the purpose of this self-confessed media spectacle was sort of to promote black metal and sort of to also to give recognition, to give some limelight to the Helvet record store that was in Norway. Basically, that was run by Oystein Arthseth, where all the black metal, the burgeoning black metal scene, all the musicians were kind of gathering at this record store. But sort of Varg Vikernes and Oystein Arthseth and some of the others that contributed to this anonymous article, they later, can sort of confess that we were the ones that tipped, all this information to the Norwegian press. They were basically trolling the media, trying to garner any attention, negative attention at that, to what they were doing. And they sort of have this self-proclaimed satanic image that really wasn't what they were trying to do. Arthseth wasn't a Satanist, neither was Varg Vikernes, neither were any of these bands. They were not Satanists. They were basically just really frustrated pagan boys, I guess you could say. And they were sort of using Satanism as a vehicle to sort of shock the press, to sort of garner attention towards the black metal community, towards the European metal scene. And they kind of used Satanism as a vehicle for that. So shortly after this article was published in various magazines, Varg Vikernes was taken into custody and questioned. And basically, once he was in jail, he was kind of still trolling. You gotta love Varg Vikernes. He had the following to say about the Norwegian conditions in prison. He says, "It's much too nice in here. It's not hell at all. In this country, prisoners get a bed, a toilet, and a shower. It's completely ridiculous," Varg says. "I asked the police to throw me in a real dungeon and also encourage them to use violence on me." So you gotta love these Norwegian guys. They're just, they're constantly role playing. They're like on full, all day marathon LARPing mode or something. I don't know what they're doing, but Varg Vikernes was, he knew he was in a pretty bad predicament. And actually, if you watch the trials from the murder trial, we haven't really gotten to that yet. but you'll notice that Varg Vikernes is kind of smiling, and he's still trolling the press. And that's kind of been misconstrued. People kind of thought that he was just crazy, but the reason that he was smiling was because he was under the assumption that he was going to be able to appeal this whole case and maybe go for a retrial or something a year or two later down the road to get a lighter sentence, but that didn't end up happening. So we've already covered the arsons. Let's move a little bit to the Varg Vikernes confrontation that ended up in the unfortunate death of Mayhem's Euronymous. Basically, in addition to the arsons, Burzum's Varg Vikernes was also convicted in 1994 of the murder of his former friend Oystein Ardseth of the band Mayhem, known as Euronymous, that took place a year prior in 1993. But to keep a long story short, in 1993, the two musicians had been at odds creatively as well as professionally for some time leading up until the altercation that ended in an unfortunate murder, as we stated. Now, this sort of scuffle, this murder, this altercation took place at Euronymous' apartment. And basically, Varg's version of events is that he met up with Oystein Ardseth Euronymous under the guise of trying to solve some of their sort of business failures. Oystein Ardseth was borrowing money from Varg Vikernes to press vinyls, to sort of make t-shirts, but he basically was just kind of getting by just using all the money to pay rent. And there's speculation that Oystein Ardseth was just kind of a shady business character. Right now, rest in peace, Euronymous. We're not trying to make accusations against the dead, but it was getting to the point where Euronymous was becoming not very well liked in the black metal community around this time. So basically, Varg met up with Oystein Ardseth under the guise of trying to hopefully solve this ongoing conflict, but it actually didn't end up going that way. And Varg actually had been tipped by some of the other peers in the metal community that were in contact with Euronymous. The Euronymous was actually planning to basically shoot Varg Vikernes with a stun gun, right? And then he was going to tie him up and torture him and get this all captured on some kind of snuff film, is what was speculated. Who knows if it was actually going to go that far, but considering these Norwegian guys, I would not put it past these fuckers. So let me know in the comments what you all think happened between Euronymous and Varg Vikernes. Now, coming in at number 2, we have Faust from the band Emperor. I'm going to give you guys a quick little rundown of the crime that took place with Faust and the murder that took place in Lillehammer. So basically, Bard, Guldvik, Faust, Ethun, the drummer for legendary black metal act Emperor, was convicted of stabbing a man to death in the town of Lillehammer, which I suspect is the crime that Varg and Euronymous were kind of titillating or sort of confessing to in the Norwegian press, but obviously it wasn't them, it was Faust that later came out to confess to this crime. So basically, the man allegedly solicited Faust for sex, some sort of kind of homoerotic invitation, right? So the guy was kind of hitting on Faust, allegedly, is what Faust confessed to. And basically, Faust kind of started thinking in his mind, like, yeah, I'm just going to invite this guy out into the woods where the murder actually took place. I guess he actually turned on the guy and just sort of like let the guy fall into his own trap. So there's no indication that this guy was, performing any kind of violent act on Faust. I think Faust was just really offended and really maybe obviously very offended and very taken aback that he was propositioned for, male sex. So he ended up losing his temper, something to that effect, and actually killed the man. The man was allegedly innocent, apart from the accusations of sexual activity that he was trying to perform in with Faust. Now, it's basically they walked out into the woods where Faust killed him. Conversation took place, obviously, prior to that. I'm not sure how he killed him exactly. Maybe a knife, maybe a gun, who knows? You have to look at the police report. But a few days later, Faust, along with Varg and Euronymous, burned down the Holmenkollen Chapel. So not only do we have these sort of covert murders going on in the Norwegian metal scene, we also had the arsons that were kind of taking place around this same time period. And that is kind of what, for better or worse, and I don't want to take any emphasis or power away from the albums, away from the great musicians that took place, but obviously the Norwegian metal scene, the Norwegian black metal scene in particular, kind of garnered a lot of its popularity from these arsons and from these murders and from these conflicts that took place around the early 90s. So Faust was subsequently sentenced to 14 years in prison, of which he served only 9 years and was released on good behavior and probation and all that good stuff. Now, Faust has since expressed remorse for his crimes and claims that his time behind bars actually helped him to reflect, and he actually came out a much better person. So let's hope Faust does not end up doing any more crazy things such as arsons or murder. And I also think what's interesting by this video, hopefully by this sort of narrative that I'm presenting, you can kind of see how all these musicians, all these bands are kind of interconnected. Obviously, the metal scene in Norway, the black metal scene is very diverse now, but at one point in time, it was pretty niche. It was pretty low. It was pretty, local, or I guess it was spread out, but it was pretty underground, right? We had Burzum, we had Immortal, we had Darkthrone, we had Emperor, we had a lot of different brands, but they all pretty much knew each other. Now, obviously, Immortal, they kind of went in their own direction. Enslaved kind of went in their own direction. Emperor kind of went in their own direction. And basically, the only one that sort of maintained this image of controversy was basically Varg Vikernes, apart from the later 90s where we had bands like Gorgoroth that we'll get to. And that actually comes to our next topic, which coming in at number 3, we have Gaahl. So Christian Eyvind Espedal, known as Gaahl, former vocalist from the band Gorgoroth, who sort of his debut with the band was featured on the Insipid Satan album, which is actually a pretty good album. Gaahl actually went on to serve 12 months in prison in 2002 for the alleged assault of a man that took place prior to that in 2000. Now, later in 2004, Gaahl was again accused of assault, but also kidnapping, torture, and some other crazy things that we'll get into after an argument took place between the victim and Gaahl at a house party. Now, Gaahl had, in all fairness, been harassed throughout his local community. Gaahl lived in a pretty small rural village. If you guys want more information on Gorgoroth and Gaahl, or sort of the more controversial aspects of Gorgoroth, I do encourage you to watch the short documentary made by Vice, I believe, called True Norwegian Black Metal. Now, a lot of the controversy surrounding Gorgoroth is not really the full story, because Gorgoroth is not, Gaahl is not the face of Gorgoroth. The true mastermind behind Gorgoroth is actually Infernus, right? Everybody knows, more about Infernus, but Infernus is real low key. He's even more mysterious than any of these guys. He stays out of the press for the most part. He doesn't really give interviews, but he is, in fact, the true mastermind behind Gorgoroth. But Gorgoroth, their creative vision, as time went on, got more and more hijacked by Gaahl's antics. So anyway, getting back to Gaahl here, Gaahl was accused of beating the man as well as bleeding the victim's blood into a cup, as well as attempting the man to force the guy to drink his own blood. And basically regarding his crimes, Gaahl stated the following: "I was the one who was attacked, but they think I punished him too hard. As I always say, when people cross my line and I let them know where that line is many steps before they cross it, and they still choose to cross that, then I will be the one to decide what their punishment will be." So Gaahl has spoken on these charges, basically claiming that they were in self-defense and that a lot of redneck types had tried to intimidate him in and around his hometown due to his introverted nature as well as his controversial status as a black metal musician. Coming in at number 4, we have Tim Lambesis. Tim Lambesis, of the vocalist for Christian metalcore band As I Lay Dying, was accused of hiring a hitman to kill his wife in 2013. Lambesis eventually went on to plead guilty in 2014, and he actually went on to serve 6 years in prison, was released on parole on good behavior shortly after that. Now, Lambesis initially pled not guilty for unknown reasons. Maybe he thought he could somehow beat the case, but I think his lawyer sort of talked him into some type of a plea deal or whatever. And Lambes's attorney basically claimed that the musician was, his violent actions, or his covert violent actions, were the result of extreme steroid abuse. And if you actually look at Tim Lambesis from As I Lay Dying, it doesn't surprise me. The guy looks jacked up on steroids. But just a very, very shocking, controversial crime, just because of the sole fact that, As I Lay Dying is a Christian metal band. Behind the scenes, he was planning to sort of, have somebody take his wife out. Now, he does, not that he had reasons for that, obviously, but he was had some ongoing custody battle with his wife. There's speculation that she was trying to take custody, take custody away from him with their 2 children. I think 1 or 2 children they have. What drives a man or a woman to want to kill a former spouse? Who knows? But it almost happened to Tim Lambesis. But he actually ended up faring pretty well for trying to arrange a potential assassination. He only served, less than 10 years. So hopefully we can see Tim Lambesis staying out of trouble. And I do think As I Lay Dying is back on track. They're making some new albums as far as I'm concerned, as far as I've heard. So we wish all the best to everybody in the As I Lay Dying camp. So coming in at number 5, we have Pat O'Brien from Cannibal Corpse. This was a pretty shocking crime, pretty shocking controversy that took place roughly around 2018, where the guitarist of Cannibal Corpse was arrested for assault and burglary in his hometown of Tampa, Florida. O'Brien allegedly forced his way into a home, committed some burglaries, maybe committed some vandalism, actually pushed one of the residents, a lady, onto the floor for unknown reasons. It's believed that there's speculation that O'Brien was under the influence of some kind of meth psychosis or under some kind of extreme paranoia. I remember when Carl Sanders from Nile actually chimed in and said that, things like this happen to metal bands because, being on tour for so long could be so grueling. So we had a little shout out from the guy in Nile there. But it actually remains unclear who these neighbors were or what the altercation was between these individuals and Pat O'Brien. Shortly after left the residence, where the story actually gets worse. He was hiding in the backyard in the bushes when the police arrived. And then when they came and basically tried to sort of, ascertain the situation or get Pat O'Brien to, turn himself in, if you will, O'Brien refused to comply with orders, where he actually eventually charged at a police officer with a knife, allegedly, and was actually tasered and arrested. And, that's where the story of Pat O'Brien kind of ends. But oddly enough, at the same time of Pat O'Brien's arrest, a mysterious fire erupted at a house owned by Pat O'Brien's. It's kind of unclear if this was Pat O'Brien's main residence or if this is just a house he used for storage. But as the fire was taking place, a bunch of fire, gunpowder and machine guns started going off. Allegedly Pat O'Brien was hoarding weapons in this residence. So obviously some extreme mental health issues I think were going on with Pat O'Brien from what I gathered. And it's real unfortunate because he kind of lost his career. I don't know if we could ever see Pat O'Brien make a comeback. He's kind of kept a fairly low profile from what I know. And later that month, or, shortly, a couple months after the initial arrest, O'Brien was seen in court wearing an anti-suicide vest. I do believe that George Corpse Grinder Fisher and, Alex Webster, some of the members from Cannibal Corpse, did reach out in support of their former band member. And, to this day, nobody really knows exactly where he is mentally. Maybe he's just kind of keeping a low profile. Hopefully he's still playing his guitar. Pat O'Brien was one of the best death metal guitar players, I'll say hands down. But, getting back to Pat O'Brien and his sentence, he was eventually sentenced to 150 hours of community service, $3,793 of restitution, as well as a 5-year probation program with time served. But it does not appear that apart from the initial maybe 5 to 6 months before he was sentenced, I don't think Pat O'Brien served any time. Maybe he served like a year in some kind of detention center or something. But it kind of goes to show you how fairly lenient the legal system appears to be, especially for these crazy, heavy metal guys. I mean, the judge could have just looked at, these characters and just given them 20 years, based on the way that they look. But it's reassuring that the legal system is fairly forgiving to a point. So coming in at number 6, the final shocking metal crime that we have for you guys today is Jon Nödtveidt of the Swedish death and black metal band Dissection, who was convicted for the murder of a gay man named Josef Ben Meduar. The victim was allegedly shot twice with a pistol by Nödtveidt, as well as an accomplice named Vlad. Speculation remains on what the motive may have been, but Jon Nödtveidt is a member of a satanic cult that is actually rumored to perform human sacrifices. The name of the cult is Temple of the Black Light. Kind of reminds me of Legions of the Black Light by Watain. So who knows, maybe Eric Danielson is part of this secret satanic organization. It wouldn't surprise me. So, whether or not that was, a cult sacrifice related to the Temple of the Black Light, who knows? I don't think that's ever been proven. So the Swedish authorities did eventually deem this murder by Nödtveidt as a hate crime against a gay man, which I think was justified. There's no indication that this man was doing anything to Jon Nödtveidt or this other unknown individual named Vlad. It does appear to be some kind of cult satanic heavy metal sacrifice. If that's a thing, it wouldn't surprise me. And even rewinding all the way back to the Inquisition video, we talked about potential covert operations in the heavy metal underground. So are there actually satanic cults in Europe? It wouldn't be so far from my imagination. But let's close this video out. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think of these shocking heavy metal crimes. Let me know if there's any interesting ones we could explore. I know there's a lot of other ones that are out there. I kind of wanted to get some of the most well-known ones, but also some more interesting ones that you probably haven't heard of into this video. Thank you so much for watching. And if you are playing in heavy metal, please stay out of trouble. You do not have to get any of these badges of honor, under your belt in order to become a successful heavy metal band. But who knows? Maybe if you're in Norway, you got to do something crazy to get a record deal. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.